When you go through obstacles and hard times in your life, nobody cares. You know, they like the ultimate, the end of the movie. They don't really care, you know, about the ins and outs and the hard times. They just want to see the success story. And I keep a close relationship with my fans. That's why I keep putting out so much underground content. So regardless of how much they hear me on the radio, I don't ever want to be the one that's not in the rucker. I don't ever want to be the one that ain't in the barbershop talk. You know, it's like I want to have both. And if I can pick one, I'd rather be a god in hip hop in the streets than to be, you know, a big commercial pop star. You know, that's not respected by my peer.
The unit. Yeah. There's a lot of things in this world you can be. But I hate to be you, nigga. You're not true. All of this is murders and burglars around my way. Poverty, society, climbing up every day. Honesty inside of me, proud to be what I say. I stay here too long, it'll probably come my way. Things don't wanna go and get clean, they want that yay. Run up on my mansion, you running up on the K.
What up, guys? Your boy Quake, and I am back with a brand new episode of What Happened To. But before we get into that, be sure to follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at QuakeGW. A link is in the description below for both. With this new episode, I'm deciding to focus on an artist that came out in the early 2000s. I like to switch back and forth from more recent artists to older artists, and this one is definitely another one that is very underrated. And this artist is someone that is part of my favorite hip-hop group of all time, and as you guys know, that's G-Unit. And the artist that I'm talking about is the most lyrical one in the group, and as you can tell by the video title, I'm talking about Lloyd Banks. What happened to Lloyd Banks? Now, to me, Lloyd Banks is easily one of the best rappers I've ever heard lyrically, and I'm willing to put up my money if Lloyd Banks battled any rapper in hip-hop history ever. I'm willing to bet he'll either win or it'll be a very, very close match. With that being said, you guys know how these episodes go. I talk about how they got into hip-hop, highlight major points in their career, and then obviously talk about what they're doing now.
When I ride by, I don't care. G-Unit's going straight to the top this year. They know me everywhere I go, that's what fame do. But we can keep it on the low, what's your name, boo? I'm fresh, I'm fly, I'm so damn high. More than 500 horses when I roll by.
Lloyd Banks was born on April 30th, 1982. He was originally born in New Carrollton, Maryland, but obviously ended up in Queens, New York. As Lloyd Banks grew up, he started listening to hip-hop, and he says his main early influence was Big Daddy Kane, but he also listened to Rakim and Slick Rick, and then eventually liked the newer generation at that time, which was Mobb Deep, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, Biggie, so on and so forth.
My earliest influences was it ranged from Rakim to Slick Rick, Big Daddy Kane. It's probably like the biggest influence, and then it leaked over to like the newer generation with Mobb Deep, Snoop Dogg, Biggie, of course, Tupac, you know. But one of my first influences was probably Big Daddy Kane.
He says that when he performed for the first time at age 11 or 12, that's when he decided he wanted to become a rapper because he liked the thrill of the stage. And to build his name, he decided to battle rap people in Queens, New York. He was from 134th Guy Brewer Boulevard from Jamaica, Queens. So everybody that was in that neighborhood knew Banks as the best battle rapper. So he would go and battle rap other people in different areas. Lloyd Banks was close to Tony Yayo. They were only 4 years apart, so they hung out a lot. And this is how the bond between Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks happened. They both liked rapping, so they both hung out and rapped with each other. 50 Cent came into the picture a lot later because 50 Cent was about 7 years older than Lloyd Banks, and as you know, a 7-year age gap is a huge difference around that time when you're young, and 50 was not hanging out with Banks. He was hanging out with Tony Yayo because him and Yayo only had a 3-year age gap. Tony Yayo, though, however, would be the middleman between Lloyd Banks and 50 Cent finally meeting. As Lloyd Banks got a little bit older, Tony Yayo noticed he got better with time, so Tony Yayo introduced Lloyd Banks to 50 Cent. 50 Cent heard Lloyd Banks and loved the type of lyrics he was spitting, so that's when G-Unit officially formed. But before we would hear all three of them on the same track, Yayo and Banks would be releasing a lot of freestyles together. They actually appeared on the DJ Rough Hands mixtape 134 All-Stars. You actually see on the cover Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, and even Bang'em Smurf. You don't see 50 Cent on the cover at all. You just have a couple of tracks on the mixtape that were from 50, but no collabs from Yayo, Banks, and 50 at all. Then in 2001, Banks, Yayo, and 50 would end up recording a lot of music together. The first track they ever recorded all together was called Bad News. It would end up getting featured on the 50 Cent Is the Future mixtape, but the first track that the public heard of all three of them together was a track called That's What's Up on the May 2002 mixtape that 50 released called Guess Who's Back. However, this almost didn't happen. Lloyd Banks on September 10th, 2001, one day before 9/11, ended up getting shot at a club. After this, Banks, of course, decided not to go out anymore and just strictly focus on recording music with 50 and Yayo. They ended up teaming up with DJ Who Kid and started pumping out mixtapes, building their buzz. From that buzz, as we know, 50 Cent ended up signing with Shady Records under Aftermath and under Interscope, and then they granted him his own label, which was obviously G-Unit Records, and then the first two artists signed to G-Unit were Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks, and this is when Banks officially got his major label deal, and his first major label album appearance was obviously on 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying on the track Don't Push Me, which also featured Eminem, so Banks got the best placement ever he could as a new artist. He ended up getting on a track with 50 Cent, who was huge at the time, and Eminem, and held his own weight. From that, Banks did not waste no time and decided to release his debut mixtape, Money in the Bank, in the summer of 2003. This would be the first official Lloyd Banks mixtape where Lloyd Banks was the lead artist. Banks didn't let up, however. He then followed that Money in the Bank mixtape with a newer mixtape on September 20th, 2003 called Mo Money in the Bank. And this mixtape was just another way for Banks to solidify himself as a solo artist as he was gearing up for the G-Unit debut album. The G-Unit debut album was released on November 14th, 2003, titled Beg for Mercy, and it did very well, selling 380,000 copies within the first week and debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200. However, there were 3 artists on this G-Unit debut album. It was 50 Cent, Young Buck, and Lloyd Banks. Tony Yayo was still in prison and the game had not been inserted into the group yet. So Banks, of course, got the shine on this album. It was very clear on this album that Banks was the most lyrical one in the group. And mind you, Lloyd Banks was the youngest one in the group as well. So for him to be so lyrically above 50 Cent and Young Buck, it definitely caught people's attention. The album was a great leadway to Lloyd Banks' debut album because the 4th single that was released off of Beg for Mercy was a track called Smile, and as we know, this was mainly a Lloyd Banks track. It was released on April 8th, 2004, and in that same month, Lloyd Banks released his first single off his new debut album, and the single was called On Fire. And this single did very well for Lloyd Banks. It peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, and this was the first time a G-Unit solo artist did this, because you have to remember 50 Cent was signed to Eminem's label and not his own label, so Lloyd Banks was now the first artist presented from G-Unit officially and was doing very well. Then Lloyd Banks finally released his debut album, The Hunger for More, on June 29th, 2004, and it skyrocketed to number 1 on the Billboard 200 and sold 433,000 copies within the first week, almost 500,000 first week, and this is only off of one single that was released to promote the album. According to RIAA certifications, it says the album has only gone platinum, but this certification date was on September 9th, 2004, which was a long time ago. A lot of people speculate that this album has now sold well over 3 million copies. After the album came out, they kept promoting the album by releasing new singles and shooting videos for them. The second single was I'm So Fly, which was released on July 13th, 2004. This track did not chart on the Billboard Hot 100 at all, but it did perform well in the streets. The reception was very good. Then they chose Karma as the third single off the album on October 19, 2004. The single did very well because it was more of a female-driven record. It peaked at number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100, which was way better than what I'm So Fly did. With the success of his debut album, he also managed to release Part 3 of Mo Money in the Bank mixtape series called Cashing In on September 19th, 2004. Also in 2004, he got the title for Mixtape Artist of the Year.
So one of your strong points, I heard that you were Mixtape Artist of the Year.
Actually, 2002, 51 Best Artist on Mixtape. And when I saw that plaque, I was like, damn, you know, I wanted to get one, you know, so I set my goal to get it the next year because I had a solo album coming out in 2004. And I achieved that goal. That plaque is like my most important plaque because the people gave that to me. You know, it's not like any big award show and, you know, you got a bunch of fat guys with suits on behind the desk who really never even heard your album and critiquing it. So this was given to me by the people, so it's definitely appreciated.
After his huge success in 2004, of course, Lloyd Banks had to take a step back because there were other artists on G-Unit Records. Because of not being in album cycle mode, he did not release a single solo project in 2005, but he was featured on 50 Cent's The Massacre album, Tony Yayo's album, and even did a couple features for other artists. He appeared on Busta Rhymes' Touch It remix that year, and he appeared on Daddy Yankee's Rump It remix with Young Buck that year. He also appeared on the G-Unit First Lady artist Olivia's single Twisted. Then 2006 came, and this is when Banks was getting back into the cycle of releasing an album. He was prepping up to release his sophomore album, but there was a huge fork in the road. Banks had started recording his sophomore album in 2005. He initially called it The Big Withdrawal, but this album ended up leaking online on the internet. And how this happened was Banks was sleeping with a couple of women. He accidentally left his CD in the room with them. They took the CD and ended up leaking it online. So he essentially lost a whole album of work. That album is still available online right now for download. Go ahead and check it out. It is called The Big Withdraw. The album is amazing. The concept of the album, the whole project is very good. And now we will never know what that could have been because of those females leaking that album. Regardless, Lloyd Banks is a monster in the studio, so he had a bunch of tracks stacked up and was already gearing up to release an album in 2006. Build up his buzz, he decided to release a new mixtape on May 27, 2006 called Gangrene Season Starts Now. Gangrene was initially supposed to be Lloyd Banks' own record label apart from G-Unit. However, as we know now, it never ended up panning out for him, and we don't know the details as to why. Lloyd Banks then, after having that album leaked and releasing his mixtape to build up his buzz, on September 3rd, 2006, he released the first single called Hands Up featuring 50 Cent. The single was produced by Eminem as well, so it had a great backing to it, but the single did not perform as well as his previous first single off his debut album did. The single ended up peaking at number 84 on the Billboard Hot 100. It did well on the Hot Rap Songs chart. It peaked at number 15, and the Hot R&B and Hip Hop Songs, it peaked at number 30. So street-wise, it was doing very good, but commercial-wise, like they had hoped, it did not perform that well. Banks also pushed the street record with 50 Cent called Cake. The music video was shot. 50 never appeared in the music video. Then on October 10th, 2006, Lloyd Banks dropped his sophomore album, Rotten Apple. The album debuted at number 3 with 143,000 copies sold within the first week, and as of January 2017, the album has sold over 600,000 copies, which means it's gone gold. After the album's release and its poor performance to what Banks was used to and to what G-Unit Records as a standard was used to, they tried to keep promoting the album by releasing more singles. The third single was called Help, featuring Carrie Hilson, and this song did not chart on the Billboard Hot 100 at all, but it did peak at number 77 on the Hot Hip Hop and R&B charts, which sucks because it's an amazing track. I don't know how it got so underrated. I don't know if Interscope dropped the ball on promoting this single, but this song should have easily been a top 10 hit. Everyone that I know that has listened to it has always had it on repeat and has always said it's very underrated. Following the album, he decided to release another mixtape. This would be the final chapter for the Money in the Bank series. It was called The Gangrene Season Continues. It was released on December 18th, 15th, 2006. In that same year, he appeared on Eminem's single You Don't Know featuring 50 and Cassius. He also appeared on Eminem's mixtape The Re-Up. In 2007, no music was released from Lloyd Banks as a solo artist. Then in 2008, he was gearing up to be featured on the next G-Unit album, which was called Terminate on Sight. But before that dropped,